pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Today I've got another page 112 tag for you. This is the totally blind version. I'm not going to explain anything about the page 112 tag. I'll put the standard description in the show notes, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to explain it. But basically, with the totally blind version of this tag, I have exchanged 3 page 112s from 3 different books with another booktuber, and I'm going to read his and evaluate them without knowing the titles or authors for any of them. And the other fellow is going to do the same in his own video. That's the totally blind version. There's many ways to do this tag, but the totally blind one is kind of fun. I am doing this collaboration with the lovely Oly Bliss, who needs and deserves a lot more subscribers than he's got. I love his channel. He is a British bloke who loves reading queer fiction and making art about it. And he often does the art live during the making of the videos, so please check his channel out. You won't be sorry. And it's been a lot of fun working on this as well as a recent buddy read with Oly. I have 3 pages printed out that he sent me, and at the end I'm going to check his email. I have not opened the 4th email, which is going to reveal to me the titles and authors, so let's get started. This is book number 1, and this begins with a quote. I think with some hard work on your part and professional assistance, you can uncover these blocks and find the way to a deeper, more meaningful relationship with a man. She took a breath and smiled that administrative smile. Haven't you ever thought about children, Molly? No. This time she couldn't hide her shock. I see. Well, dear, I have arranged for you to see one of our psychiatrists here 3 times a week, and of course you'll see me once a week. I want you to know I'm in there rooting for you to get through this phase you're in. I want you to know I'm your friend. If I had had a blowtorch, I'd have turned it on her smiling face until it was as red as her hair. I didn't have one in my purse, so I did the next best thing. Dean Marn, why are you pushing me so hard to be a mother and all that rot when you aren't even married? She squirmed in her seat and avoided my gaze. I had broken the code and put her on the spot. We're here to discuss you, not me. I had plenty of opportunities. I decided a career was more important to me than being a homemaker. Many ambitious women were forced into that choice in my day. You know what I think? I think you're as much a lesbian as I am. You're a goddamn fucking closet fairy, that's what you are. I know you've been living with Miss Styles of the English department for the last 15 years. You're running this whole number on me to make yourself look good. Hell, at least I'm honest about what I am. Yes, her face was red. Inflamed. All right. Well, that's book number 1. I love the sass of the narrator. I love the sentence about the blowtorch. And that's all I really like. This is a piece of fiction, obviously, about a lesbian coming out story. And it's really hard to do that in a fresh way, and this does not strike me as at all fresh. This strikes me as the kind of story I've read 1,000 times before, and there's nothing much except for that one line that interests me. Now, it may interest a lot of people who are in the midst of coming out or who are younger, but as somebody who's read umpteen coming out stories, this very typical therapist or social work counseling session scenario is not interesting to me. But the writing's fine, and I love the sass of the character. I love that one line about the blowtorch. That's about it. Interesting. Here is book number 2. What are they making? Chris asked, lifting his chin from Conrad's knee. I can't make it out. It's a suit, I think. Not a suit of armor, nor of chainmail, but a suit made of feathers. Fiery feathers, such as the phoenix wears when it rises from the ashes. The smiths are Icarus and Daedalus, pounding the fire into freedom. I peered at the embers and forgot about Jake. I stared, but the vision was broken by the sound of the front doorbell. Chris swore and went into the hallway. It's probably that student journalist I was talking about, Anna, said Conrad. He looked expectantly toward the door as Chris returned. "Sorry, Conrad," Chris said. "You all know Father Cuthbert." The priest followed Chris into the yellow room. Unfeasibly tall, he had to bow his grey head to enter the doorway. He glanced disdainfully at each of our faces in turn. "Oh dear, Christopher," said Father Cuthbert, his mouth twisting into a grim smile. "I do hope my house hasn't become a seedy commune for every low-life beatnik in town. I'd hate to think that those unsavory rumors I've heard could possibly be true." "Do sit down, Cuthbert," Chris said, with a lame attempt at hospitality. "We've just opened a bottle of whiskey. I'm sure there's a glass somewhere." "I don't think so," the priest said, sharply, although he lowered himself into Chris's throne. He read the label on the bottle and winced as though he had been personally insulted. "It would be ungracious of me to deprive you of such luxuries. I think you will need as much Christmas cheer as you can afford this year." He reached behind his cassock and produced a cigar with the swift maneuver of a magician. I was fascinated by his spindly movements. He worked with anticipation, holding the room in morbid suspense as we wondered what his next manifestation would be. Glancing coldly around, his fingers tickled the ridge of the brown cigar. "You see," he continued in no particular haste, "a parishioner of mine, an inexperienced youth who has the misfortune of attending the same polytechnic as you, suggested that I take a look at a series of juvenile articles in his student rag, written by a certain Christopher Mavrocordatos. Oddly enough, my young parishioner found much to amuse him in these scribblings, but he is particularly immature, and I can forgive young men most things. However, I failed to find the humor in a letter entitled Church of the Poison Mind. Do you recall that article, Christopher? I imagine you do. You wrote it." Wow, I didn't like that at all. Hate is too strong a word, but it just left me cold. The writing is really dull, and the dialogue, and the characters, it just cliché and cliché and cliché. It would seem from the opening line that we're dealing with a piece of gay fiction. Chris is lifting his chin from Conrad's knee. I'm curious about that. It's obviously a university setting. Is it a seminary? There's Father Cuthbert. But I don't really care at all. So that's interesting. The cliche of the therapist trying to convert or talk her client out of lesbianism doesn't interest me. The cliche of a disapproving priest who may or may not be a closet case, I didn't get any of that particularly, but just his condescending moral disapprobation is really dull reading for me. But these kind of stories, these kind of people are in the world, and these are some of the obstacles queer people have to contend with. And I'm sure when I was 20 years old, this story, if I'm extrapolating correctly from that page, would have spoken to me deeply. But it sure leaves me cold today. So, let's keep my fingers crossed for book number 3. Now, Agathias had a talent for it. During the plague, the entire population prayed and begged for help. Agathias did all the work, and Dennis's reputation grew. How these things work remains obscure to me. People were never my forte. Dennis ended up helping the boy accidentally when he led him down that deliciously aberrant path. "Getting whipped cures migraines," Satan said. "Whoever markets that will become a zillionaire." "Don't be obtuse," Catherine said. "It is unbecoming. Who knows how these mechanisms operate? All we know is that as soon as the boy understood his needs, the moment ecstasy revealed herself, pain vanished. I do not know why. However, it seems that migraines, like desires, are recrudescent. Once death purloined the souls of his friends, and he decided to be a proper citizen of this scurvy world, the migraines returned. Maybe not as frequently, but he still suffered." "Could it be that migraines are caused by boredom?" Satan asked. Once the boy gave us up, he confined himself to a life of inanition. Agathias. Well, I for one loved Cairo, Agathias said, running his fingers through his palm leaf, which still appeared as if it had been broken off a tree only a few moments earlier. Still do. Oh dear! This set of page 112s is a bit of a bust for me, I'm sorry to say, because that one just sounds ridiculous to me. What are we dealing with here? Fantasy or allegory? Satan and capital death? Or some historical fantasy? Agathias, I'm not familiar with that name, but it certainly sounds Roman or something. So is this kind of some Roman gay allegory? I'm assuming it's gay because of Oly and our shared interest in gay stories and the reference to the boy understanding his needs. But it doesn't interest me at all. Not at all. I think the writing is just dull. I hate words like purloined and inanition. Really? Do we need this word? I know inane, so this is the noun for inane. A life of inanition. Well, maybe it describes my life to a T. However, there is one word that is one of those Latinate words that's just horrible. But I learned it when I was 14 years old, and I've never forgotten it, and I love it because I have a very personal relationship with it. Recrudescence. When something bad, it's basically relapse. It means relapse. Something bad comes back. And it's used here as a adjective, isn't it? However, it seems that migraines, like desires, are recrudescent. They come back. That was cool. That was my favorite. That's the one word in this page that I liked. So that's the set. So this is the second page 112 tag that I've done where I didn't really care in any deep way for any of them. So I would really like some viewer feedback. Is it entertaining for you when I don't really care for any of them? I don't want to be overly negative. Should I be pre-screening to include at least one that I can get excited about? Please give me your advice. I've actually discussed a little bit with Oly about this because I did preview these a little bit and kind of anticipated it was going to go this way and didn't want to hurt his feelings, and he assured me that I would not. So I would choose number one because of Molly. She had a lot of zest, a lot of vim and vigor, and she wanted to take a blowtorch to her therapist. But other than that, that book didn't interest me, and the other two just leave me cold. So, but part of what I see is the point of these tags is that hopefully I'm introducing these stories, these books, to other of you that might like to investigate them, in which case it's certainly not a waste of my time, but I would some feedback on whether the versions where they're all kind of duds for me personally, what can I do to safeguard against that, or is it still entertaining for you? So, anyway, without further ado, I'm going to find out what these books are. Okay, that took a few minutes, because he wrote quite a little explanation of each book. Now you can see the monitor reflecting on my cheek, but maybe that's all right. So yes, I am surprised. Book number one, which was my pick if I had to pick one, is by an author who I've never read any of her fiction, and this is her most famous novel, Ruby Fruit Jungle by Rita Mae Brown. This is a classic lesbian novel from, I think, the 1970s. I used to have a copy of it. It's probably in a box somewhere in Canada, but I have talked on this channel before about her writing guide, Starting from Scratch, I believe is the title. And this is her. So let me read you what Oly's written, because he's taken the time to explain why these books meant a lot to him. And so I'm glad that I touched base with him a few days ago to make sure that I wasn't going to hurt his feelings by the fact that I didn't like the pages. And he said no, but this is what this book means to Oly. I have literally just communed with this book on holiday, and I absolutely loved it. Molly Bolt is a determined and intelligent woman who stands her ground and defies illogical social rules, whilst holding firm to her own set of principles. The story is told in 4 parts from childhood to mid-20s, a slim read at only 216 pages. So, yeah, that's a classic. Has anyone else read it? I think I will try it at some point. But it's probably would have spoken much more deeply to me when I was a young'un, like Oly is. Number 2 is a novel that I've heard of neither the author or the writer. Of Bodies Changed by Cliff James. And Oly writes, this is a reflective story where Jackie travels down to South Downs and uncovers the history of her estranged brother. It's part family drama, part psychological thriller, and part magic realism. Or not, which is part of the fun of the story. It's independently published, which I admire. So, a hidden gem. And he says he's done a review and a speed draw where he draws a picture based on the novel. So check that out. I will definitely go and check that out. Okay, yeah, it wasn't for me, but... And number 3 is a novel that I'd heard quite a bit about and had heard enough to decide it probably wasn't a book I ever wanted to read. And page 112 bears that out, and that's The Angel of History by Rabbi Alameddin, who is a gay... I can't remember what his ethnic origin is, but he's a Muslim American novelist who has a marvelous Twitter account where he just tweets an art gallery a day. So Google him for that reason and follow his art. But I had gathered that his fiction wouldn't be for me, and this is his most well-known novel. This one is really brilliant, Oly writes. Actually, it won the Lambda Prize last year, which is the Queer Writing Award. Jacob is reflecting on his past and is visited by Satan and death alongside other saints. It's a really angry book which looks at his experience seeing his friends die from AIDS, how he feels as someone who has mixed cultural roots, and looks at the roles of time and memory and how they obscure and erode history. And Oly's made a video about this, which we should all check out. So, yeah, that one is just not for me, but for lots of other people, it got a literary prize last year. Those are today's books. So, coming out narratives, I think they're so important, and it bugs me that there is kind of a it feels like almost a taboo within queer society against producing coming out narratives anymore, and I think they are so important, but it's really hard to do a coming out story and make it interesting for somebody who's been around, who's been living a gay life for as long as I have. Two that I read last year that I would highly recommend that do an amazing job with representing the coming out journey are John Boyne's novel, The Heart's Invisible Furies, and from France, I believe it's right here. And this French novel, which is really a memoir, but called a novel as far as I'm concerned, Edouard Louis' The End of Eddie. This one especially represents, this is translated from the French, and this one represents the wounded hero's journey of coming out and dealing with all that sexual shame. Maybe one of the best that I've read in my life, but certainly in decades, at telling that story unflinchingly. So, yes, the coming out narrative is very important. It's hard to do while avoiding the cliches, and I felt that book number 1 didn't for me, but I'm an old queen. If I had read that book in 1989, I might have had a very different reaction to it. So that is the page 112 tag, totally blind version. Thank you, Oly. It was a delight. Let's do it again sometime if you seriously don't hate me for dissing your books. If anybody else is interested in doing a totally blind version exchange, if you're a booktuber, we can exchange 3 sets of page 112s, or if you're a subscriber and you just want to email them to me. I've got a bit of a backlog now, so I don't need any in an urgent way, but it's fun. And please let me know about your feelings about watching a tag where I'm not really excited by any of the 3 page 112s, because and what I could do to avoid that in the future. All right. Thanks for watching.